Okay, so hello everyone. This week's video is going to be shorter, at least I plan it to be shorter than last week's, because this is a topic that I usually teach in a very interactive way, relying on your responses and questions and answers, which is this time is kind of impossible. So that's why I plan this video to be a little bit shorter. But also because of that, this week you're going to have two tasks to complete instead of last week's one. One of them is going to be just like last week's, just a short little thing, just to see that you watch this video. The other one is a little bit longer. This is something that we usually do in class. It's a really creative and fun task, so I hope you're going to enjoy it. But right now, let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. Or in this case, let's see what makes a superhero a superhero. You had to read Coogan's text, the definition of a superhero, which is, I think, is a pretty good text in an attempt to define what a superhero is. Of course, it's not perfect. Never, nothing is going to be perfect because it's a very multi-layered question about genre, about character building, but I think it's a really good idea. At least he has some really good ideas, and uh, amongst them, I want to focus on his triad, this MPI. So the mission, power, and identity. I'm going to go a little bit beyond them and beyond what Coogan is saying, but first let's focus on this triad. First of all, the mission. I would say that the mission is actually made up of two parts, a point in the past and a point in the future. So basically, what makes the character do what they are doing and what is the reason they are moving forward. So basically, what is the origin story and what is the goal? The origin story is something that we are going to talk a little bit more in detail next week, as you're going to see that there is actually a huge difference in how Marvel and DC treat their origin stories, so I don't really want to go deep into that. But basically, the origin story is something that most, if not all, superheroes have. These are their defining moments, the events that sets them on their journeys, something that is the foundation, the very foundation of their character. And the goal is something that they are moving forward. Most of the time, of course, is going to be something very simple, something very generic, like fighting crime, fighting injustice, doing this, doing that, just being heroic. Of course, then there are instances when it's going to be more complicated, but the point is that basically the mission part is made up of two smaller parts: the origin story, which points at the past, and the goal, which points at the future. Then let's move on to power. When we talk about power, I think the most important thing that we have to acknowledge is that not all powers of superheroes are actually super. By this, I mean that they might be within the realm of believability. So basically, stuff that, yeah, could actually happen in real life, like Batman. That could kind of happen in real life, I guess, maybe. Elektra. So instances when basically their powers come from training and being a badass, sort of. Also, when it comes to powers, once again, I would make two smaller categories: the inherent powers and the acquired powers. In the case of inherent powers, I'm talking about stuff that the characters were born with. In this case, they might be mutants, they might belong to some alien race, um, they can be magicians born with magical powers, all kinds of stuff can happen. This is basically why I love superhero narratives so much, because anything can happen. Superhero narratives are a very unique mix of fantasy and sci-fi, and basically you can go on the sci-fi route and explain some everything with pseudoscience, or you can go on this fantasy road and you can say that stuff happens because of magic. And these two things can coexist. Like Scarlet Witch can have children with vision and stuff like that. So I think it's a really good thing. So anyway, I was at inherent power, something that the character is born with. And then we have acquired powers that were acquired during their lifetime. Once again, in the case of acquired powers, we can talk about several subcategories. These powers can be technological, like for example, Iron Man. They can come from an accident, like Spider-Man, from experiments or experiments gone wrong, simple learning, like, well, Doctor Strange might belong to this category, kind of. Batman belongs to this category. Batman is kind of a mix between learned and technological. So once again, they can be mixed all the way through. So yeah, powers can come from different sources. They can be inherent, they can be acquired, they can be super and fantastical, and they can be more mundane, basically. And what is really important, I think, about powers, that they might or might not come with hindrances. This I mean that a character can have powers, and those powers can have no adverse side effects on their everyday life, or they can. For example, I don't know if you guys have seen X-Men: The Last Stand. There is that scene in that movie when, so yeah, in that movie there is a cure for mutantism. Basically a shot, you get it, and it suppresses your mutant powers. And there is this one scene when Rogue is kind of overjoyed when she hears about that there is a cure. And of course, because of her powers, she cannot touch anybody. And then we have Storm, who can make storms and who can control the weather. And she's like, there is nothing to cure, nothing that you need to be cured of. That being a mutant is not a sickness, not an illness. But once again, for Storm, there is no real hindrances to her powers, unlike Rogue. Sometimes powers come with changes in appearance. Think about, for example, the Fantastic Four, The Thing, Clobbering Time. The guy looks like a boulder, an orange piece of rock. So yeah, once again, powers may not disturb your everyday life, and it might turn it upside down. And actually, this is something that becomes more and more frequent in later narratives. So in earlier times, during the Golden Age, most of them, if you got powers, it was huge thumbs up. It was a good thing. You didn't really have to think about the downsides of having a power, of having superpowers. You just went on being a superhero and stuff like that. Okay, I'm checking my notes, what we have to talk about. Basically that's about power. So they can be inherent, they can be acquired. Acquired powers can be technology based, can be learned, acquired through an experiment, through an accident. They can be bestowed on you. For example, Shazam, he's just given that power and then he gives it away, if you think about the movie. And they might affect your life negatively, or they might not. They might have an effect on your looks, on your appearance. They might not. So there are a lot of factors here. And there is identity. Okay, identity in this case is super important. Why? Because superheroes, comic book characters, need to have a very distinct look, because throughout their history, and sometimes we talk about 8 decades of history, they are being drawn by dozens of artists who has completely different art styles and use completely different visual styles, and and the characters still need to be recognizable. And how can this be done? First of all, one of the most important things is the color scheme. Even MacLeod talks about that some superheroes, if not most superheroes, can be recognized by the color scheme alone. By this I mean that, for example, if you saw like a green block and under it a purple block, you would recognize it as Hulk. You see red, blue, and white, you recognize it as Captain America. Yeah, Captain America. This is even my bad Captain America shirt. Anyway, so yeah, even just the color scheme can help you to recognize a character, and that is why color schemes very, very rarely change. For example, it's very interesting, the case of Carol Danvers. So Ms. Marvel, Captain Marvel, the name changed. So when she was first introduced in 77, her first dress basically had not the same but a similar color scheme as she has now, because she has now the gold, red, and blue color scheme. Her first dress, it was mostly red with golden highlights and some black, basically. But it was only used for a couple of issues before it was changed to that black bathing suit kind of thing with the lightning bolt, and for over 3 decades she had this black, yellow, and a tiny bit of red color scheme. And then it was changed in 2012 to what we have now, and basically it's almost like we have two different characters. She changed her clothes, she changed her name from Ms. Marvel to Captain Marvel, and from 2012 she has been written by women. So there is such a tonal shift in the case of that character in 2012 that it's almost like we had one character before 2012 and we have a different one now. So it's very interesting how just the color scheme and just the uniform can change the perception of a character. Or for example, when it was in the 90s, I think, when Spider-Man got the whole black outfit, and people hated that because the red and blue color scheme for Spider-Man is so iconic that many people hated the all black. Or just okay, just staying with Spider-Man. As you know, right now in Marvel Comics, you have two Spider-Man. You have Peter Parker and you have Miles Morales, both of them using the name Spider-Man. And they have very similar looking uniforms. I mean, the line art is very similar. But Peter stays with the red and blue color scheme, while Miles has a black and red color scheme. And even though their uniforms are very similar, they look very much alike. Because of the colors, you would never ever confuse them. That is how important the color scheme is. The other part of identity that is very important, and it also helps recognition, is what Coogan calls the chevron. The chevron, or the symbol, which is basically always there on the character somehow. So of course the most prevalent, the most frequent way is that they're wearing it on their chest. This is also a very simple representation of the character. A simple image that we right away associate with the character or with the group. And it's very good for merchandising. You just put that very simple symbol on anything and you can already sell it. And when you wear it, people already knew that, okay, that symbol represents that character. I've been thinking about if I had anything like that at home, any merchandise, and basically the only thing that I could remember was this one. So this is a keychain, Captain Marvel keychain. Once again, there is no name there, no face there, nothing that that is an actual representation of the character, only the symbol. So this is called the Hala star plus these stripes, which represent her Air Force origins. And I have this one, and it's super clear that it refers to Captain Marvel, and also the color scheme, red, blue, and gold-ish. So yeah. And I also have a little Iron Man here, a chibi Iron Man. And once again, you have the very distinctive color scheme, the red and yellow. What is very distinctive of him, well, the stuff that he wears in his chest, which is not here right now, but what is here is the shape of the helmet. This is also very iconic of the character. So when there is a symbolic representation of Iron Man, it's either the mask, the helmet, or the, what's this called? Oh my god. The arc reactor. So it's either the helmet or the arc reactor when we are going for a symbolic representation of the character. So either the color scheme, the symbol is enough for us to recognize the character. We don't actually have to see how they look like. We don't have to see their faces. And this is also helps when we are adapting a character to live action. Usually there are some slight stuff. For example, in the case of Tony Stark, it's the facial hair. In the case of Wolverine, it's a very iconic hairstyle. But yeah, usually just a symbol, the color scheme is enough for us to recognize a character. So basically, yeah, this is what Coogan talked about, mission, power, identity, but I want to go a little bit deeper. And what I want to bring up is the so-called prototype theory. It comes from cognitive linguistics. Cognitive linguistics is something that most of you have already studied about, or you are going to be learning about that. Personally, it was my favorite part of linguistics. But anyway, so cognitive linguistics studies the connection between how we think and how we talk. And prototype theory is basically so. In cognitive linguistics, we put everything into categories. And prototype theory says that there is always an item that is a better representation of the items within the given category than other items. So, for example, if I say that category of birds, the prototypical bird for us is going to be like a sparrow or a dove, a pigeon, more likely a pigeon. So birds that we see the most. For us, this is the most prototypical bird, the best example for the category of birds. But for somebody living in Africa, for example, or Asia, the best example for birds, the prototypical bird is going to be different. It's the same for superheroes. That's why I asked you yesterday, for me it was yesterday, what is the character that comes to your mind the first time when I say superhero? And more than half of you actually mentioned Superman, which is something that I expected, because Superman is the prototypical superhero. He was the first one, he's been around the longest, and his visual representation is super iconic. What I mean here is that when we think about we close our eyes, we think about superhero, the category of superhero, and we see Superman. Superman is a white, male, muscular, in skin-tight clothing, with a chevron on his chest, his underwear outside, and a cape. And when we just have to think about a generic superhero, for example, think about ads, when it's not an actual character, but they try to, a company tries to advertise their stuff with adding a superhero-like character, they are going to have the cape, the maleness, the chevron on the chest. This is how pervasive the prototypical superhero is. When we think about superhero, we think about Superman, we think about how Superman looks like, even though most superheroes in today's comics do not look like him. Very, very few superheroes wear capes, for example. There are more and more female superheroes, more and more minority superheroes. And by now we have mostly realized that wearing the underwear outside is kind of lame. And no, nope, we are not doing that. So yeah, but we still have this idea that the superhero wears the underwear outside. And it's the butt of the joke still, even though no one really wears their underwear anymore in the superhero world. So yeah. So basically, the point here is that we are going to recognize a generic character in cape and skin-tight clothing and being male and white, and anyway, just a very generic superhero-like character. We are going to recognize that as a superhero sooner than some characters who are in actual superhero narratives. Just think about, for example, Hawkeye. If you were confronted with a picture of this general superhero with his cape and undies and a picture of Hawkeye, you're more likely to say that the first picture is a picture of a superhero. So this is the power of prototypes. And finally, I wanted to talk about how not every character in a superhero narrative is going to be a superhero, and that's okay. I think it's something that I've already mentioned in class, or it might have been my other class, that I've gotten into an online argument once, and the argument was that we see Batman as a superhero even though he doesn't have any real superpowers, but we do not classify Peggy Carter as a superhero even though basically she is on the same level superpower wise, and how this is sexist. Basically, the person who started that post was on the opinion that is sexist, that we call Batman a superhero and we don't call Peggy a superhero. And I think that it's completely okay not to call Peggy a superhero, and it's not sexist. Very simply, Batman checks more boxes than Peggy does. If you just think about the identity part, Batman has the very the very basic stuff about the visual representation of the superhero. He has a chevron, he has a color scheme, a very easily recognizable silhouette. Or we don't really know that much about Peggy's origin story, for example. She doesn't have one very iconic look. I mean, of course, there is the blue skirt suit with the blue hat, which is only there in like one scene in the series and in advertisement. This is not something that keeps coming back. It's not that she goes out to fight and she wears that. So she lacks the visual power, the visual representation. The origin story is kind of muddled. She is within a superhero narrative, of course, but it doesn't make her a superhero, and that's okay, because there are several different types of characters within a superhero narrative. You wouldn't call Nick Fury a superhero either, because he's more like a secret agent, a spy. And other than that, you get characters in superhero movies, superhero narrative, such as anti-heroes or vigilantes like Punisher. You get secret agents, you have the detectives, the scientists, the builders, miscellaneous supporting cast like girlfriends, boyfriends, of course girlfriends more likely. You get the villains. There is also something that I wanted to add about villains, something that is called the villain decay. So just we are using more and more terms. The villain decay is basically when we are first introduced to a villain and he or she looks like a huge threat, and as we move forward in the story, the villain itself doesn't change, but a bigger threat is introduced, and compared to this bigger threat, the initial villain suddenly seems tame. So tame that we could actually team up with them. As an example, just think about Loki. Loki in Avengers and Loki in Infinity War, for example. So yeah, that's the villain decay. So once again, there are a number of different different types of characters in superhero narratives, and not everybody who are in superhero narratives are superheroes, and it's okay. It's not sexist, it's not racist. Simply there are characters that check more boxes than others, and some people are fit the superhero definition. Some characters we perceive as superheroes and some we don't. And it's not a bad thing. Being a superhero within a superhero narrative is not, it doesn't mean that you are better than the other characters. It's just that you belong to a different category. Peggy Carter is an amazing character. She is girl powered, but I wouldn't call her a superhero. She's a spy, and a super cool one, that is. And just as a closing note, some interesting stuff is, can we have a superhero narrative without a protagonist who is a superhero or has superpowers? It's very interesting. It's something that Marvel is actually experimenting with right now. They have two series, The Amazing Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy. I have already read the first issue of Gwen Stacy, but I've been reading the Mary Jane series, and it's basically about she's an actress, according to the story. She's an actress, and she's been cast in a movie about the life of Mysterio, and it turns out that Mysterio is actually in the one who has written the script and who is directing it. And there are some usual superhero threats, but it's Mary Jane, somebody who has no powers, she never fights, and she's the one who drives the plot forward, who navigates the waters of Hollywood, so to say. It's a very interesting story if you're interested, so if you wanted to check it out. Now so this is basically what I wanted to tell you about superheroes and the definition of the superhero. Once again, if you have any questions, I'm going to be online at the time of the class, so Monday morning. I'm going to make a new forum on Moodle, and you can shoot your questions, or if you're impatient, you can even shoot them on Facebook before that. But let's see your tasks. The first one, and this is going to be how I see that you watch this video, I'm going to upload pictures of characters from superhero narrative, superhero movies to the Facebook group, and I want you to analyze those characters with Coogan's definition. Everyone should analyze one character. There are going to be as many pictures as you are in the class. This is basically first come, first served. So you go into the album, you choose one, you analyze it, and if somebody analyzed it before you, well, I'm sorry, then please choose another one. And the other task, which I usually do in class, is that I want you to create your own superhero based on Coogan's definition, or at least use Coogan's definition as a help. So create a superhero. You can even draw it if you want, but you don't have to. You don't have to. So create a superhero character. Go as crazy as you want. Have fun. So once again, this is something that we do for basically fun in class. Also in class, I usually do it with small groups, so 3, maybe 4 people creating one character, so you work together. Right now, I think it's going to be the best if you work alone. And at least we're going to have more characters to look at and enjoy. So yeah, please do the task and upload your character to the Facebook group. And that's for it today. Thank you very much. Bye, guys.